Know my heart and mind. Welcome to the Empowering the Village podcast with your host Andrea Greer. As the saying goes, it takes a village to raise a child. We tackle the real questions and tricky topics you often wonder about, so you never have to journey alone. In this podcast, your host Andrea Greer is here to support you so children like me can thrive and flourish. Join us as we dive deep into discussions designed to empower, educate, and connect our community. Are you ready? Let's jump in.
Kia ora koutou, and welcome to another episode of Empowering the Village. I'm your host, Andrea Greer, founder of Nurturing Relationships, a play and trauma therapist. And today I am absolutely honored and thrilled to have a very special guest and friend with us. I would like to introduce Jase Williams. Jase is a phenomenal tane, a visionary leader, and a transformative voice for healing. Jase brings over 25 years of experience to the table. I truly admire Jase's courage, his voice, and the massive shift he has brought not only to the education sector, but also to our communities regarding trauma-informed practice. As the former principal of Henry Hill School, Jase led a culture shift that earned his school the Prime Minister's Education Excellence Award for Wellbeing. He's the author of the book, Your Trauma Has a Whakapapa, which will be published in February 2026. Jase is the real deal. He has walked the talk and paved the way for making an impact not only here in Aotearoa, but beyond. I have huge respect for him and what he stands for. Welcome to the podcast, Jase.
Cool. Thanks so much, Andrew. It's lovely to be here, and it's really hard to sit there and hear someone say nice things about you. It's lovely to hear, but there's still that little part of me that it still feels like you're not good enough. So it's nice to hear, and at the same time, it feels weird.
Soak that in because you absolutely deserve that. So we're going to begin with some icebreaker questions just to relax into the korero and also for our listeners to get a sense of who you are. So the first one, what is your favorite summer activity?
It's really boring, actually. It's purely just being at home. I spend so many days living in hotel rooms. Someone asked me the other day whereabouts I lived, and I said hotel rooms, because it's basically the truth. I spend a lot of time out of town working, so just to be home and be present, not doing anything in particular. I know in summer in particular, though, it's so nice to put the pool up and jump in the pool, and I'm a really big basketball fan, so I spend that summer break watching as many games as I can, and that's it. So nothing really, really exciting, but just being able to be present and grounded for a little while is really, really nice.
And I guess that's the price sometimes you pay for passion and, what you really believe in, isn't it? Yeah. It
really is. No one talks about the cost. So you spend a lot of time supporting, helping others. And I guess for me, I became a lot more aware. I was in Rotorua doing a parents' evening, and someone said to me, if there was like a silver bullet or a thing that parents really need to put into their parenting practice, what is it? And I said, it's really simple. It's just being present. And I kind of paused in that moment and realised I'm a couple of 100 kilometres away from my own family. So whilst I'm talking about presence and parenting, I'm not present at home. So yeah, people don't talk enough about the cost of delivering this kind of mahi, the emotional cost, but also the separation. We talk about attachment, we talk about connection, and for a lot of my year, I'm actually disconnected from the people I love the most. So that can be really, really challenging.
Huge sacrifice.
Yeah.
So you have traveled a lot to different cities, as you've mentioned. Do you have a favorite city that you love?
Oh, that's a cool question. It's not a city, but I would say the southern part of Upolu in Samoa. I've been there a couple of times. I love being there. I'm not Samoan, but it really feels like home when I'm there. So that would be my favorite place to go. The other place I'd love to go is to Los Angeles. I know a lot of people will go there and they say it doesn't live up to the hype. For me, as a kid that grew up idolizing American culture, hip-hop, sport, they were the two areas that kind of nurtured me and helped me grow. It's really cool to go there, so they would be the two places for me.
Beautiful. Awesome. And what is your favorite childhood memory?
This is a hard one for me because I don't have a lot of childhood memories. For various reasons, my brain shut off when things weren't very nice happening around me, which I'm glad happens, but then it means there's lots of gaps in my memory of the good things I hope happened. So one memory I have is waking up on a Saturday morning, and we're a family that would always eat around the table. But this Saturday morning, Dad woke us up and said we were going to eat in the lounge, which was a real treat to eat in the lounge. So Dad, when he was home and not out of town working, Dad drove diggers and trucks. He would make porridge, and we loved it. Like, there was nothing like Dad's porridge. So myself, my two brothers, younger and older brother, we got up and we sat in the lounge and had our porridge and had our toast with Dad. And he went to the TV and he pushed play on the VCR. And on the screen came these larger-than-life characters. The show was called WWF Superstars of Wrestling. I'd never seen anything like it. These are people like Hulk Hogan, the Ultimate Warrior, Jake the Snake Roberts, Andre the Giant, these larger-than-life characters, and I became obsessed with it. It's my guilty pleasure now. I still love wrestling and watch wrestling, and my dad's been gone for 28 years, and because of the work I do, I feel that there's some synergy there between me keeping the memory of that time and my dad alive with the wrestling. And I've got 3 kids, and they've all had their time watching wrestling with me. And then they got a little bit older and they decided they were finished watching wrestling. My dad kept watching it. And I have 3 mokopuna, 3 grandchildren. And the 2 eldest have had their time, and they're still in that time, so they still like it. And the youngest one is 18 months of age, and we had our first little wrestling match together the other day. And I had him diving off the top of our couch onto me on the ground. He did it a couple of times, and then I think he kind of realised that he was up quite high. And then he's like, well, I don't know if this feels safe enough yet, but we'll get there with him. So yeah, that's the childhood memory that I hold on to, and that I love talking about. I wish I had more.
That's cool. And I love how it's become a legacy for your children.
I'm not sure if the kids feel like this.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. So this podcast episode is really focused on parents and how we can break the cycle of trauma from repeating. So what first drew you to working within this trauma space?
Yeah, it was really, I stumbled upon it by accident, or it was meant to be, depending on which way you look at things. But for me, I was over in the US and I was visiting local schools in San Francisco, so Silicon Valley. And the purpose of the trip was we were doing some cutting edge things with tech, with iPads at the time, which were newish out there. And I wanted to see what was next. Let's get ahead of the 8 ball and be that school of choice for people. And that was the plan, until I turned up at elementary schools and the focus is social and emotional learning. These are children whose parents are involved in the industry that don't want their children on devices, you know.
Ironic.
Exactly, and we don't talk enough about that. But I saw lots of plants in classrooms. Even though I lived in New Zealand, there were more plants in their classrooms and spaces than we had at our school. So that was something I saw first. Watching children talk openly about how they were feeling, and really that concept of empathy. And honestly, I didn't know what it was, and I certainly wasn't showing it in lots of places. So it was real learning for me. And when I reflected on our community, I thought, yeah, there's some stuff we could learn around empathy and social and emotional learning. So brought that back, and we started to add some elements of it into our school. We started doing a bit of breath work and yoga. We just chose yoga because we just needed something movement-based, where kids are intentional about their breath and their presence, and they really latched onto it. I mean, it may not have been like that. It may have been horrible and no one liked it, and we would have to have done something else. But for us, yoga took off, and it made a difference. And then a few years after that, I was fortunate to go to a conference and hear Dr. Bruce Perry speak. He wasn't a draw card as such for me at the time, but he was the keynote speaker. But once I heard him speak, I realised why there were thousands of people there and why they were cheering when he walked up on stage. And his stories were about American children and schools, but they were also about our children, the children at my school, the community I worked in, my own family members and friends I could see in his stories. And I wasn't self-aware at the time, but I was in those stories too. So saw that and came back and thought, this is going to be a game changer for our school. This is going to help fix these kids, was my mindset at the time. And then after really delving into trauma and trauma-informed practice, I realised that the kids are okay. Kids are just doing what kids do. And it's actually us, the adults. We are either the problem or the solution. And, which one do we want to be, really? So after really diving deep into it, I realised that this isn't about kids, this is about us. This is about me. And that was really the start of it. Once I realised that the stuff I was learning, this neuroscience, which is based around a whole bunch of indigenous ways of knowing and being anyway, was helping me to be a better person. And that's when things really took off, when I started to actually look in the mirror and see the real me looking back at me. That's when things took off.
Yeah, I love that, because I think when we're looking at how we break the cycle of trauma, it really starts with us, isn't it, in that inner work. So can you tell us a little bit about your own personal journey? Because we know that breaking the cycle isn't easy. Often healing is messy, it's confronting, it's vulnerable. Can you describe your own personal journey of breaking the cycle and healing generational patterns? What was that journey like for you?
Yeah, really hard. It's hard to, like I said before, look in the mirror. I believe so many people do look in the mirror, but what they see staring back at them is not what the rest of the world sees. And I think that can be really, really confronting. And I think at that point, a lot of people switch off or switch out because it's too hard. The word I'm using for that is capacity. Do we have the capacity or not in that moment to work on it, to deal with it, to manage it? So for me, it was, lack of self-awareness. And as my awareness grew, due to the knowledge I was attaining about kids in a school, then I started saying, hey, this is me that needs to change. And actually listening to the people around me, the people that love me the most, and hearing how they receive me, how I am, because the way I'm received and the way I perceive that I am were two very, very different things. I was that guy at school as a principal doing really well. Even back when I was a teacher, very successful teacher, kids connected with community, that was no issue for me. What I didn't realise was that I wasn't received that same way at home. And I remember I was in Chicago, must be about 6 years ago now, and I was over there for work looking at schools, and I received a text message from my son, Casey would have been about 22, 23 at the time, and it was 3 short sentences. And the first sentence said, Happy Father's Day. Second sentence, I love you. Third sentence, I'm proud of the man you are now. And I sat on the edge of that bed that morning just crying. Very deep, very guttural tears. And the only time I remember crying like that before that moment was when my dad passed away, like 23 years before that. So I was brought up in a generation that was told to get over it and harden up and toughen up, take a concrete pool, don't cry, and the girls cry. If you don't stop crying, I'll give you something to really cry about. So it's fair to say there wasn't a lot of crying happening in my life. But what was happening was those feelings and emotions weren't being felt, and they were being buried up and being bled over everyone that I cared about. I just didn't know it at the time. So to have my son acknowledge Father's Day was real big, because the year before that, I didn't get a text. The year before that, there wasn't a text. And I'd convinced myself that he didn't know what it was, that he didn't see the flyers in the mail from Kmart and Warehouse and Farmers and ads on TV. We call that cognitive dissonance, when we push aside the reality because it's too hard to cope with. We don't have that capacity in that moment. So that was special hearing that. And then that second sentence, I love you. I grew up in a home where I never heard those words. They weren't words that were expressed verbally in our house. I didn't know that mattered either until I hit my 40s. And for a lot of people, when you hit your 40s, all your shit comes up. Yeah. For me, it come up, and I wasn't ready for it. So for him to say those words said to me that we had broken a cycle, because we were able to use those words and say it to each other. I mean, for some people, they're just words. But when you don't hear those words, and you realise later on the impact of not hearing those words, because not hearing those words had said to me that I didn't belong anywhere, and I wasn't important enough, I wasn't good enough. So hearing that made a massive difference for me. In that last sentence, I'm proud of the man you are now, I reflected on that, and I'm like, wow, obviously there's some change happened that he's acknowledging, and he's proud to tell me, or he feels safe enough to actually tell me this now. That's huge. Then I had to stop and reflect further, like, what do you mean now? So obviously how I was before wasn't a nice person to be around, and that's really hard to hear. It's really hard to hear. So for me, that was telling me that, yeah, we've done some work, and it is, we have to do. And the work doesn't necessarily mean seeing a therapist, but it can do. But we know for a lot of people, therapy is so hard to get. It's expensive. Not a lot of men will go to therapy. For a lot of men, their therapy, they have other types of therapy: ice baths, going for a run with their friends, playing rugby on the weekends, going down the pub and having some beers. Those kind of things can be therapeutic. They also, some of them can be harmful as well at the same time. We know that behind young Māori men in this country, the next group most susceptible to suicide are rural farmers. We know that. I was told back in the day, rural men and farmers would go for a beer on Friday, sit at the pub and drink with their mates, and they'd talk about whatever they're talking about. We're doing that less now. I'm not advocating for alcohol whatsoever. What I'm saying is that was an opportunity to bring people together. And we're not doing that anymore. And in the spaces I work in, which is not just education, but also do work for the Ministry of Social Development, and I do work in suicide as well. And a lot of the men taking their lives go to the gym, look after themselves physically, do the ice baths, they do breath work, they're into all that stuff, but it's when they're by themselves. Those regulating activities work best in community. I spoke recently at a suicide awareness event, and I said one thing we need to stop doing is we need to stop telling men to reach out, because when they reach out, there's no one there. We need to be the village. We can't keep telling men to reach out if we're not going to step up, because when some men do reach out, they're met with ridicule, mocking, told to harden up, told that happened to someone else and they're okay. So that man won't reach out again. Other men that hear about that, they won't reach out because they've seen what's happened to that man. So if we're going to tell men to reach out, we need to be there to receive it, no matter what it is, with unconditional love. No matter what it is, no matter how hard it is, we need to show up.
And I love what you're saying here, because often we think that breaking the cycle means it's on me and it's all my responsibility and it's an individual kind of work. So we've become a very individualistic kind of society. But I really love your perspective here, and it comes from a Te Ao Māori perspective, that really healing is from the collective, that we need community around us.
I think that's the issue, that everything's become individualistic. We talk about resilience. We don't often use that term when we talk about communities. We talk about it as an individual thing. You did so well with that, you coped so well. And that was said to someone who had just lost a partner recently, you coped so well. I don't know if you're supposed to cope very well with that. I lost my dad 28 years ago, and I don't believe there was any kind of positive grieving that came from it. We just got on with life. We got on with it. So someone would look at that and say it's being resilient. I think we need to stop talking about resilience and talk more about capacity. Do we have the ability, the capacity to actually hold this stuff, or do we need support from people? And I saw a quote recently. It's on social media, and the guy said, there comes a point of time, there's a certain age where we can't just keep using our environment we grew up in as an excuse and our upbringing. What I want to know is, bro, what's the age? What's the age? Because I never really had true self-awareness till in my 40s. I wasn't able to truly regulate myself when things got hard until I hit about 43. So tell me the age that we're all just supposed to be fixed. So capacity is something we need to talk a lot more about. Because if you're, for example, a teacher and you're going through some financial worries at home, and then you're at school all day, and there's a couple of kids that are dysregulated themselves, which in turn dysregulates you, you don't have a lot of capacity to deal with it, because you're also trying to manage the whole class. And then you go home afterwards when you spend like 80% of the capacity you have as a human being, and you only have 20% to give to the people you love the most. There's a bit of an issue there. So we just have to be aware of the capacity. So Brené Brown talks about using percentages, because you often talk about a relationship being 50-50. Well, that's not true whatsoever. There's 100%, right? And if I walk into my house in the evening and I'll say to my wife, "This is from Brené Brown. I've only got 30 left. My wife needs to pick up the 70 for us to be whole," right? And then there's times where she's like, "Oh, look, I've only got 20. I've got to pick up the 80. That's how a relationship works. So it's about communication. It's about grace. And a lot of the time we very seldom show grace to ourselves or anyone else for that matter. So really showing grace that we're doing the best we can in that moment. We're showing up the best we can. Even if we're showing up in a real shitty way, that's where we're at in that moment, right? And showing grace for ourselves. So I think capacity, showing grace is really fundamental to doing the work. But again, there is no timeline on this. There is nobody that's healed. Healing is a lifelong process, and it's a journey, and it doesn't end until your final breath.
Yeah, thank you. That was really, really beautiful. And I just reminded of your story with your relationship with Casey and the rupture and repair.
Yeah.
And how there is no relationship that's, I guess, so far off that you can't repair it. Yeah.
And I guess, again, that comes down to capacity. It comes down to modelling. So if you're an adult and in your upbringing as a child, you didn't see good models, positive models of when there's a rupture, this is how you can repair it. You're going to find it really hard to do that yourself later, because it's hard to be what you can't see and what you haven't experienced. It's not impossible, but it's difficult. So again, it comes down to that capacity, comes down to what modelling's happened. I know that when Casey was 7, my wife and I were sitting in the lounge at home, and he walks in and he said, I've got to tell you guys something. What's that? And he told us that he was gay. And I've always known. And I needed to, and I should have said something a lot more empathetic and nurturing and loving than the response I gave, which was no shit. Not very helpful, but I was still at a point in my life where I hadn't done any kind of work on myself. Those were the words that came out of my mouth. I now know those are the words from the limbic brain, the emotional brain. It wasn't the prefrontal cortex. I wasn't shocked or surprised that he said it, but that's not what he needed from his dad. The response from my wife, his mum, was much more nurturing and empathetic and loving than what I gave him. I'm fortunate that over time, my son and I have spent time talking about this stuff, and it's hard. It's hard when he brings up experiences, the way I parented, and those memories to me have been locked away. Everything he's saying is accurate and true, but I'd push those to the side because it hurt to realise that I'd been parenting in basically the same way I was parented from my dad. And I didn't want a parent like that. And when I do parenting evenings with people, and I talk about the importance of being, presence, like I've mentioned, I also talk about the ability to show that capacity and repair those ruptures. But we're often not aware that we've caused that harm. So we've spent a lot of time over the years just talking. I still find it hard to say sorry. I still find it hard to say those words, even though I am. Again, not modelled for me growing up. I saw ruptures from my parents. I never saw any repairs. I saw my mum masking. I saw my mum fawning, saying whatever it took. So Dad stopped. I saw a lot of that. So that's what I take into my relationships. That becomes the model and blueprint for what a relationship looks like. And I think about previous partners. I'm like, wow, you experienced a real shit version of me. That was who I was at the time. And then I think about who I am now, which is certainly not how I was at the beginning of my relationship with my wife, but how I am now. I heard a friend of mine, his name is Jeremy Eparaima, and Jeremy also was a champion for the Ministry of Social Development working with changemakers, and he, in his relationships over the years, had caused a lot of physical and emotional harm for his families, his partners, his children, and he said that he's been on this journey of healing for the last 20 years, but there are always going to be people that will only ever see him as an abuser, because that's the snapshot, the moment of time they saw him and experienced him in. And he said there's not much you can do about it apart from keep modelling the change and the journey he's been on. And in lots of ways, I kind of feel that too. I remember being at a conference, actually you were there, Andrea, in Napier, and I remember talking on stage about prize givings and my distaste for them. There is a way to do them really, really well, but most people don't. And I looked down at my staff from my old school that were there, most of them were there, and I could see them as I spoke. They weren't rolling their eyes, but I kind of felt the energy coming from them, because the way I'm talking about stuff is not always the way I was when I was there. And again, people will sometimes only remember you at a point of time, a snapshot, and that can be hard to deal with too and face. That can be really hard as well.
And it's about, knowing for yourself the journey that you've been on and that healing that you've done and that work, isn't it? And anchoring into that, knowing that, yes, that was me in the past, but this is different now.
Yeah. And I think a good thing is that I've written it in my book, like basically most of the mistakes you can make, I've made. So I'm not coming from a place of perfection where I'm this role model that's done all this amazing good stuff. No, I've done some really dumb things and really shitty stuff, and I wish I hadn't of, but I'm aware of it now. And because I'm aware of it and I've done the work on myself, I'm not going to do that again. Does that excuse, or does that... And I think about accountability and responsibility a lot, because when I work with schools, that's the thing. People are like, okay, the bad things happen, but they have to take responsibility and accountability. Now, what you mean is you want to punish someone. That's what you mean. You hide behind the word consequence, but what you actually mean is punishment. And that's intergenerational. That's judgment's a big deal. Right? If someone causes harm, we're worried about how we're going to be perceived by somebody else. If a child hits a child in a classroom, you can bet the house on it, you're going to have to talk to the parent. You're going to talk to the parent of a child that hit. And usually those conversations are okay. But talking to the parent of a child that's been physically or emotionally harmed, those are harder conversations. So the punishment helps us and helps that parent be pleased by the situation. So we do a whole bunch of people pleasing, and it's not always our way of being. So I think that can be difficult, and we don't talk enough about that as well.
And I think punishment and shame, they go together. And, we, especially for teachers or parents, when we put out the consequences or the punishment, it always comes with that story of shame as well.
Yeah, and I think if we go back to when I mentioned receive and perceive again, so we can give a consequence and or punishment, but it's about how it's perceived. And there are parenting experts in this country that have openly said in the past that it's okay to smack a child. It's not okay to physically abuse them. What we know now is that even the threat of physical punishment, you're going to get it, or I'm going to go and get the jug cord, is perceived and felt is the most important thing, is felt in exactly the same way by the body as the actual physical punishment. We didn't know that before, but when I say we, it's still not widely known now. So I think we need to talk more about that stuff as well, because if I think about a type of trauma, it's a very common type of trauma, it's neglect and abandonment. Most cases of neglect and abandonment, the adults aren't choosing to. They're not choosing to. When we use time out as a strategy in our parenting, as an education, because a child has done something that has frustrated, angered, annoyed, pissed off us, we are sending that child away from us when they need us the most. That is neglect and abandonment. But it's one of the most common strategies that we actually use. And how is it neglect and abandonment? Because that child realizes in that moment, or it's just felt in the body and it stays there and becomes stuck, which is trauma, that when I need my adults the most, they're not going to show up for me. I am alone, I am by myself in this moment. And they also realize that in order to rejoin the tribe or the group or the gang, that I have to suppress and repress and shut down how I'm actually feeling to be accepted by somebody else. And again, we don't talk enough about that. We just want the thing to stop, or the behavior to stop, or whatever it is, so we can go back to equilibrium, homeostasis, a sense of toe, or just back to reality. And it's the perception that's actually just as important as reality in lots of cases. And for that little child or child that feels that neglect and abandonment, that's carried in the nervous system. And what happens is it'll continue to come out at different stages of their life. And we have to get up on a stage and we have to speak to an audience, and then we start second guessing ourselves, and that what we call when imposter syndrome comes in. What's really happening is somewhere in your life, much earlier on as a child, you were judged or you felt judged or someone didn't show up for you, and it's that same feeling creeping up again. So when we think of trauma as adults, it's most often actually something that happened much earlier on that wasn't said or wasn't processed, that is now being felt in a similar way in the present.
And our nervous system holds those stories, and those stories become the narratives that we tell ourselves, like I'm not good enough or I'm a failure. It comes from exactly like what you said, the experience of disconnection.
And it's exactly when you introduced me and you had those nice things to say about me. I'm like, am I? Is that how I'm perceived by some people? It can be really difficult to receive praise, feedback. On the flip side, it's really hard to hear negative things about yourself. And for me, as an educator for many years, for 23 years, I had to sit through appraisals. It was a little easier when you're writing the appraisal as a leader, but it can still be challenging because we hide behind this whole veil of constructive feedback, we call it now. We used to call it constructive criticism, which is what it actually is. And no matter how nicely we frame it or reframe it or put it, whatever we say will only ever be received on the other end by the person as negative, as not constructive, as destructive. Even if our intentions are pure, they will still receive it there. And that has nothing to do with the 28-year-old teacher in that moment in the classroom as you received the appraisal. It has everything to do with perhaps they were 6 years of age and they felt not seen and heard and known and valued and loved.
Yeah. And our body remembers, and our body kind of has that visceral reaction to if someone says, I want to meet with you. Our brain goes straight into the most negative scenario where, oh my gosh, what have I done? I've screwed up something, your heart starts racing. And those are the body memories.
100%. And it doesn't help that we have a negativity bias anyway in our brain. That doesn't help. There's a whole bunch of negative happening there. So, that can be a real struggle. So, for me, negative feedback, I found it really difficult to take. I'm a lot better receiving it now. I don't welcome it and don't love it. But if it happens, I'm able to breathe through it, feel through it, knowing it's okay to actually be angry and frustrated and upset. I think anger's been demonized for a long time by society. It's a bad thing. Staying angry is a bad thing. Taking that anger out on somebody else is a bad thing. But feeling angry is actually okay. It's an emotion, and it needs to be felt and worked through and processed. And allows us to have boundaries. When someone crosses a line for us, we can tell them in whatever way we need to tell them that they've crossed that line, they've crossed that boundary. And without feeling that anger, we can't set and have those boundaries. So it has its place. But again, not taking out on other people and not sitting in that state for so long. But again, comes back to capacity, comes back to what was modeled, comes back to intergenerational trauma, because some of our reactions aren't even ours. They've been inherited over generations. And I think about when I go to a space, I will look for the back of the room. Like in the building we're in now, I'd be in the back row. I would definitely be sitting in the back row. And as people come in, I just don't like people behind me, so I'd probably move my chair back even further. If there's a line, I'm going to be behind the line. And I didn't know where that came from for so long, and it's caused issues. My wife and I going out for dinner, she would ask for a quiet table out of the way near a wall or something, and it's so I can sit with my back to the wall. And she used to say, it's because you're a weirdo and you just want to stare at people. No, I actually want to be invisible in most places. And I haven't unpacked that one enough yet. I'm just thinking that on my feet right now. But what I do know is that my dad, as a youth, was walking down the street in Paeroa, and he was grabbed from behind and thrown in a vehicle and shipped down to Dunedin to Campbell Park, and was in residential care for a while. That's just what happened to a lot of youth at the time. And, he got grabbed from behind. So that kind of, there's some synergy there between the way I feel with people being behind me, perhaps. Yeah. And then I think about on the other side of my whakapapa, on my mum's side, my granddad fought in World War II, and my great-granddad, my granddad's dad, fought in World War One. I'm pretty sure at some stage they didn't feel safe from someone attacking from behind. So it may or may not be those things, but they make sense to me. Now I understand trauma. Now I understand why we do the things we do, that trauma does have a whakapapa, that a lot of what happens to us didn't start with us. It starts to make sense. Is that why I am the way I am? I probably will never know. But what it means is because I understand those things and I understand the reaction I'm having, that I'm better able to cope with it in that moment. My wife and I were in Queenstown, went and had dinner at a steakhouse. The only table available was one right in the middle of the restaurant. We had a nice meal. It was really cool. Company was cool. I would have preferred to be sitting somewhere else, but I was still able to enjoy it. 3 or 4 years before that, this is how that would have gone. We walk in the restaurant, we're shown to the table. I'd say to my wife, this place looks dumb, let's go. And I would start walking. She has 2 choices: follow me, and she's embarrassed, or sit there embarrassed. So she would follow me. Then what would follow that would probably be her, no, I don't want to do dinner anymore. And then we end up at a drive-through at a shitty restaurant, and then she's not eating either. And then she probably won't talk to me for the rest of the night, or maybe the next couple of days, just because I didn't feel safe in that moment. And I didn't have the words to talk about it or describe it then, but I have a much better understanding of it now.
Yeah. And sometimes it doesn't make sense logically because it's a fear response.
Yeah.
And it's driven. And it's so incredible what you're talking about, that sometimes that generational trauma can be passed down. And so what happened with your granddad in World War, and then with your dad being grabbed from behind. And so it doesn't make sense to you logically.
No.
But your
or
body,
anyone else.
yeah, but obviously in your cells and your DNA and your body, it holds those stories.
Yeah. I heard a lady speak. I really like her work. I'll share her name with you so you can tag it in somewhere. And she talks about human beings carrying about 260 plus ancestors with us inside our body cells. And then when you break that down, you think about the science we're aware of, and we're in a church right now. So if you think even in biblical terms, like number 7 has, there's some synergy and links there with that, as far as the Bible goes too. And I'm probably misappropriating this or getting this quite wrong, but the son will pay for the sins of the father. When you start thinking about intergenerational trauma, what I take from that is that the stuff that happens to dad that's not settled, not processed, now belongs to the son. And that maybe a bit easier to manage and deal with that trauma because it may be knowing why dad was like he was and felt like that. But let's say it's great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother and something happened to her, and then the next generation, their child, didn't know about it or didn't talk about it. As you said, it's still carried in my nervous system, and it continues to be carried through generations. And then you've got the poor child or adult on the end of that doesn't know why they are the way they are. And perhaps they could go to therapy. Perhaps that's helpful. Perhaps they can talk to someone. But it's going to be a lot harder to heal from that when there's no known knowledge of why. So we kind of talk about trauma intergenerationally, transgenerationally, being able to be kind of tracked scientifically somewhere between 7 and 14 generations. So if you think about that and the amount of people involved in 7, 14 generations, it loosely links up to about 260 people. So it makes sense in lots of ways. And if I know now that on mum's side I've got a granddad and a great-granddad that this is where they're at, I think about, because I got to experience my nana and granddad, my mum's parents, and I think about some of their behaviours they showed that are also shown by my mum. And when I wrote my book and I wanted to write a particular passage about my nana, and I started writing it, and then I stopped and paused, I was like, hang on, mum does that too. And then I yelled out to mum, hey, mum does that, right? You've seen it. She goes, you do it too. What? So unaware of how I am. And should I really do the same thing? I do it a lot less now because I'm aware, but it's just inherited, transmitted. It's like parenting, right? There'll be things, hopefully, that we liked about the way we're parented, and we're going to use them with our kids. And there'll be things we didn't like, and we'll make a conscious decision not to do those things. Well, sadly, we are going to do every single one of those things anyway, because it's transmitted. But when we're aware and we make a conscious decision not to continue doing it, that's how we break the cycles. But awareness and capacity has to be part of that equation. Just hearing someone speak, going to therapy once, it's not enough. It's just not enough.
Yeah, it's not a one-off thing, and it's not a quick kind of checklist as well, it's a quick fix. It's again showing up for yourself intentionally, daily. Yeah.
And again with grace. Doing this work is really hard. It's hard to look in the mirror and see the real you, the you that other people see. That can be really hard, because then you start thinking about the ruptures that you've caused. And I think about being a teacher, and I was a good teacher. I know I was a good teacher, and I connected really well with a lot of kids. There were some kids that I didn't. There are kids that will have a very negative perception of me, and it's justified. In that moment, I didn't know. I was doing the best I could, and that's not an excuse. But I spent a lot of time in my limbic brain, especially as a young teacher. And when you're in that limbic brain, there's not as much capacity when it comes to saying intelligent, smart things. Smart ass things came out instead, right? So again, I can't change that, and I can't change their perception of me if that's their perception. What I can do is look back at it reflectively now, because I have the capacity, I have the self-awareness, and be like, man, that was really shitty what I said. There's other ways I could have dealt with that. And it's the same with parenting. We are all doing the very best we can based on where we're at in life, what support we have. For most of us, the village is gone. We were never meant to bring up our children as parents alone. It was always supposed to be in a village and with a village. So grace is what we need to show ourselves. Even if we've got the village, it's still really, really tough.
I love that compassion, that compassionate lens of, I'm doing my best, I don't have to be perfect. It's okay to make mistakes. As long as we are moving towards healing, we're moving towards repair, we're moving towards connection. I think those are really beautiful. Let's unpack triggers from a nervous system. As parents, we are human. We're always going to be triggered. So in those intense moments when emotions run high, what practical strategies do you have for parents that they can use when they feel triggered? Because it's easy to talk about breaking the cycle now when we are in our cortex, but in the heat of the moment, I grew up with a very angry dad. And in the heat of the moment, sometimes I can hear his voice in my head yelling. And it's those moments, it becomes like a surge of energy. And, I have had many, many years of yelling at my kids. So, I would just want to hear from you. What helps you?
So a question for you. You talked about how your dad was in those moments. Were there moments where he was loving and nurturing and that as well? You remember those moments?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
So something I'll say, you'll hear me say this when I speak to educators tomorrow, is that the brain and the body prefer consistency and predictability. They prefer it. It feels safe for them. So I will share with educators that if you're an asshole, be one all the time. Be one all the time. At least people know what they're going to get. The hardest thing is when we don't know who's showing up in that moment, right? When the footsteps start coming, who's showing up? Is it dad? Is he drunk? Is he angry? It's that.
Yes, the hypervigilance.
That is what is so hard for people. So, and I don't want people to be an arsehole, but I'm tongue-in-cheek when I say that, but consistency, predictability, familiarity is what matters. So
triggers. What do we do in that heat of the moment? Like, is there practical strategies?
Yeah. Okay, so for me, my go-to is to simply step away. Step away. If we don't step away from the conflict or whatever's going on in that moment, we are going to step in. And when we step in, a couple of things happen. We're likely to be, at best, in that limbic brain, the limbic system, the emotional brain, so we don't have cause and effect anymore as an adult in that moment. We can't look to think beyond what's happening now. That if I say this or do this, that this is probably going to be the outcome. Not smart, don't do it. We don't have that. We lose access to that. We lose access to other executive functioning as well. So not a great part of the brain to be in if we're trying to help co-regulate somebody else, right? So my advice is to step away, because stepping away means there's a chance that you're going to be able to be responsive. If we step in, you're automatically reacting. And when we step in, not only are we in the wrong part of the brain, we've brought along those 260 plus ancestors with us.
Wow.
They are present with us in that moment. So the words that, I'm sure there's times, Andrea, where you can remember your mum or dad's words coming out of your mouth with your kids.
Yes.
And then you're like, oh my gosh, I sound like my parents. The same as educators, same thing. We heard that teacher that used to yell in class when we were kids. So not very helpful in those moments. So we need to ground ourselves, because when we become dysregulated by somebody else, that hurt inner child of ours is showing up. They're not helpful in that moment. So we need to find a way to put them at bay. Doesn't mean we're getting rid of them. It just means that right now, not helpful. So grounding ourselves allows us to stay not just physically there, but also mentally and emotionally there as well. And that's really important, because, we can be in a lecture and we're all physically present, but you can argue who's truly emotionally and mentally present, right? So we need to be there, because if we are emotionally and mentally present and physically present in that moment, we are in charge, not the inner child. So they're not part of that equation. We're already starting to get to the right place. And then we need to use some kind of regulatory activity that suits us. For me personally, it's breathwork. Breathwork is really helpful for me. The physiological sigh is my go-to. It's been one of the most helpful tools I have, and it's very seldom it hasn't worked.
Example, how?
Yeah, so it is 2 intentional quick breaths through your nose. So inhale, there's 2 quick breaths. So hold that breath and then intentionally release a longer breath out of your mouth. And typically 4 lots of that within under 60 seconds can move you from the lower regions of the brain back up to that prefrontal cortex, where you access executive functioning, choice, cause and effect lives here, all the smart things. You're going to say all the right things, do all the right things in that part of the brain. So that's been really, and the interesting thing about that breathwork technique is it's been developed after watching children cry. So when, we all do it, but let's talk about kids.
Right.
When a child cries, their body automatically, organically tries to regulate itself. Not intentionally. The body will go, that's the breathing pattern. So we watch that and develop this breathwork technique. And next time you cry, once you're moving out of that cycle of crying, just listen and watch and be present and just notice what's happening inside your body. So step away temporarily, ground yourself, be present physically, mentally, emotionally, whatever regulatory activity you do. Now I say whatever one suits you, because breathwork is helpful for a lot of people, not for everybody. My father-in-law lost his partner to cancer just over a year ago, and in her dying moments in hospice, she was struggling for breath, really breathless, and he called out for help, and there was nothing anyone else could do. So if I said to my father-in-law, if he was really stressed, here's a technique you can use to do some breath work, I might get a smack in the mouth, and I probably deserve it in that moment, right? So whatever suits you, and there's a multitude of different things, and that is why there is no one thing that will help everybody, because we are all unique individuals. Our nervous systems are different, our brains are different, our experiences that we've had are different. Intergenerationally, what's come before us is different. So it's going to be something different for everybody. So once we've done those things, it is highly likely we were back in that prefrontal cortex, then we can step back in, because we have the ability and the capacity then to be present mentally, emotionally, and physically for the person that needs us. And the trick is to shut your mouth. And that is the hardest thing for us. For me as an educator, it's really hard not to talk, but it's just being present, because co-regulation doesn't necessarily need words. Sometimes it does, but for the most part, just being present, focus on your own breath in that moment, your own heart rate, and just be with that person. And if we're sitting with that person, then we start thinking about what's for dinner, we need to ground ourselves again to get back to that place where we're truly present. And that's hard because our brain flicks in and out all the time. It's supposed to. So that would be what I would say. That's my go-to is step away, because we want to be responsive rather than reactive, and ground ourselves, whatever regulatory activity we need, then step back in, not with 260 ancestors, not with your hurt inner child, but as adult you.
And I love that it's anchoring to your nervous system, and I love what you've just said around there is no one way, so we need to find what actually works for us and our body and our nervous system in terms of grounding.
Yeah.
So for some it could be breath work, for others it could be proprioception, for others it could be drinking a glass of cold water, whatever it is, to be able to connect within.
Right.
Yeah, that's cool. Awesome. What I have is around dads. So just love your journey and how you've been so intentional around showing up with presence and connection, especially with your children. And I love the examples of how you've ruptured the relationship with Casey, but were able to repair and restore that, and just showing up for your moko as well. So could you speak specifically to dads listening that want to show up differently for their children, but they don't know where to start? What advice would you have for them?
We are the product of our environments. We are the product of our parents, and as I've said, the generations that went before them. And it is about showing grace. It's about acknowledging that we are doing the best we can in that moment. Hopefully, we get to a place, personally, where we can see our parents through that same lens. I see my parents through that lens. I see my grandparents through that lens. I see past generations through that lens now. I haven't always felt like that. I think about stories that I heard about my dad, who was abusive to my mum when my dad was drinking. He was abusive to mum and to us too. Again, I don't have those memories. Not the cognitive ones in my head anyway, but the body keeps a score with that. So I'm able to be in a place where I can show that grace. But one thing I do is, and I do this mostly with youth and men in prison, I ask them to think about the messages they got around masculinity and what masculinity looked like. And a lot of people in my generation would spit out names like maybe the wrestlers that I mentioned, maybe Arnold Schwarzenegger's or Sylvester Stallone, typically muscular, strong men, those types, often musicians. For me it was hip-hop, it's heavy rock, metal, that kind of stuff is their thing. They're also go-tos when you're in adolescence because you are fighting everything. The system, the parents, you're trying to forge your own path. So we see our ideals in that. And often it's the guy, it's a good-looking guy that's big and strong, that has multiple women after him, or he has multiple women on the go. Those are our models, often as men. So it's getting them to see those as models, and then through the work that I've done in MSD, but also learning from a good friend of mine, Richie Harcourt, is what about the dad that picks you up for practice after practice every week? Isn't that a good masculine man? Or dad that takes you fishing or reads you a bedtime story? That's what a good man is. So starting to share what a good man is and starting to break down some of those walls and models that we've seen in the past around masculinity. And I've done exactly the same activity with young women. Actually, I was in a room full of youth. So I had a group of boys aged between 12 and 18. And then I had a group of girls. It was different, and it was real different actually, the responses and the energy in the room. And it was heartbreaking to hear some of the conditioning that these young girls had from parents and society about how they should show up as young women. The extremes of this, like one girl heard that she needs to cover up her body because it's not for other men. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm saying that was what she was told, right? On the opposite side, use your body, it's going to get you somewhere in life. These are the parallels, right? So it's really heartbreaking to hear that. And interestingly, a couple of days later, after that particular experience, I saw a social media post from a lady who's an influencer of some kind, I believe, and she was talking about being at a beach in Australia, and there was a girl, she said dressed provocatively, and she said she shouldn't be dressed like that. Well, my question is, why have we sexualised young girls? Why are we looking at them like sexual objects, you know? So instead of just blaming, we need to take some social responsibility for the messaging we're given. So in a lot of ways, we are just questioning things. Not saying things are right or wrong or bad, doesn't mean I have the answers either. But let's just start questioning things. We've stopped questioning things. We have been so... Okay, let's be honest, school's done its job, right? Because we don't question anything. We're socially conditioned just to listen and do as we're told, generally speaking. A lot of teachers would argue kids aren't listening at all now, or never did. But let's question. Where does questioning live in the brain? It lives in the prefrontal cortex. Curiosity lives there. Doesn't live in the other parts of the brain. So in order to access that, we have to feel safe. The men that want to change how they're showing up as a dad, a lot of them haven't had that. They haven't spent a lot of time in that part of the brain. So it's really just questioning, but it's also modelling. It's sharing the stories. I'm a storyteller. I'm a big believer in telling stories. The men I've spoken with in different spaces, I've talked in corporate spaces, gang headquarters, prisons, school staff rooms. They're quite diverse spaces. And storytelling allows you to show up in those places and to be received well. And it's because you share your own stories. Again, not stories of perfection, but stories of ruptures and how things were repaired. And yeah, I've done that too. I was with a school 2 days ago, and someone asked me some questions, and they said, I feel real bad. I know I'm yelling at kids. My colleagues even telling me. I said, anything you've done in your school, I've probably done 10 times worse. And I'm the one here telling you about here is what you need to do to show up as a relational teacher. So I think that's really important, that people see you as human. And I think we've stopped looking at people as humans, and we're looking for perfection. Think about Instagram. You know, you know what I was going to do? I was going to say young woman, but I know that there's a whole bunch of body dysmorphia for young males that are looking on there for these ideal models of a man. It's all these big muscular men. Like I don't know any man in real life that looks like that. I don't have any friends that look like that. But these are things we look up to, and then we start to feel bad about ourselves. That's what we're supposed to be all like academically. The school ducks. What about the kid that's trying their very best but is still not passing? They're not good enough. And how do we reinforce that messaging? Prize giving. Right? Prize giving. So how do we do prize giving better? We acknowledge every single kid. Every single kid walks across that stage that night, and the adult that has the best connection with that kid says something special and unique about that kid. And if we did that, no one leaves that hall a loser that night. And I was really hard reflecting on that for me, because as a principal, I introduced prize giving to our school. They had an end of year assembly that was pretty low key. I think people liked it, but it was quite low key. I was like, let's do it big, dress in a suit even, which is, for the people listening that know me, but whatever, I actually did for quite a few years. Only time I was ever seen in one. But we wanted to make it big time for these kids, make it a big deal. I never realised the impact that it had, though. That out of about 300 to 350 kids, we might have put 160, 170 on stage. We celebrated them. But what about the other kids that didn't go on stage? As a principal, I never thought about that. I never thought about the impact. And if we talk about our school values, the things that matter to us most, and we celebrate these kids on stage for showing them, for embodying them, for want of a better phrase, what message are we sending the other kids? So I think the only way to do it right is acknowledge everyone. And again, you mentioned it earlier, Andrea, we live in this individual society, being pumped up to be the best we can, and we've only ever got anywhere as humans by working together. You can argue the reason that things are going to shit in society is because we're separate and trying to become even more separate. So the village is what we need, and we need to get back to that village concept. So, yeah.
Yep. Healing is a collective rather than an individual responsibility. Awesome. We love that you have written a book, and can't wait to hold it in my hands. I was privileged enough to read a draft copy of it, and it was powerful. I had lots of tears through the different chapters, and it was definitely a book that spoke to the heart and my nervous system. So thank you for that gift.
Thank you.
Can you tell listeners a little bit more about your book that's coming out?
Yeah, so initially I had good friends of mine, Scott and Kirsty, who live in Marlborough. They said to me, "You need to write a book. People need to hear this stuff." So my ego liked hearing that people want to hear. That's really cool. So I sat down, attempted to write it, and I found it really hard. And then I got as far as writing 3 chapters. And at different times, I have reworked them and I've deleted them completely. Can't even find them anymore. Deleted them so well. Kept coming back to it and it just wasn't working for me because it wasn't aligned with who I am. It wasn't authentic. And over the past year, I've been doing somatic therapy. I never ever considered therapy as a thing that I'd do. And I point people into the direction of therapy all the time. But for me, I thought, okay, what I'm learning and what I've been doing over the last decade has really helped me. It has been therapeutic. I was challenged by a good friend of mine, Matt Brown, and Matt said to me, "Uso, have you ever thought about therapy?" Because he goes to see a number of therapists for different reasons. And I said, "No," and I said, "But I promise you, if I ever feel the need, I will." So one day I felt the need, and I approached someone who thought that would understand me, but also the type of therapy she did, which is somatic therapy, was aligned with who I am now. So I approached Jacinda, who's in Christchurch at Soma Therapy, and after doing a couple of therapy sessions, I wrote a book in like 3 weeks. The words just flowed. They hadn't been there, or I was forcing it, but they just flowed. So I drafted in 3 weeks, and then I kind of banged away at it for a little while longer and edited stuff. But it started out as being, I wanted to write it for educators first and foremost, and I wanted to share relational neuroscience with them. Relational neuroscience is newish, so it's still kind of unknown by a lot of people, so I really wanted to get that out there. And my thoughts were, I'm good at telling stories, so I'll wrap some stories around this relational neuroscience. That's not what happened. What happened was I started writing and telling stories, and there's some neuroscience sprinkled in. And I really like how that happened. It's been one of, alongside the somatic therapy, the other most therapeutic experience I've had in my life. Incredibly emotional writing in different bits. I cried lots. I had to look in the mirror lots. It was really hard. I wanted to be authentic and transparent with the book. So the stories I've told are 100% the way I perceive them, but I've also reflected and spoken with other people around me at the time, just to validate it, because that's how I perceive it doesn't mean that's how it was for them. And that doesn't mean that people will still see it the same way. And I'm okay with that. So it's really a collection of different personal stories. There are chapters around parenting. The chapter on parenting is called Presence, spelled Presence, not presence, Presents. I hope I spelled that right. It sounded right in my head. And then there's a chapter on connections called Connections Being Weaponized. I also compare the school system to prison, because they are basically the same system, just dressed differently. And that's going to become a shock to a lot of educators when they actually look at the history, the roots of education as we know it now, where it actually came from and where it started, and how we're not actually that far removed in lots of ways from it, even though we've evolved and society's changed heaps, or devolved, depending on how you look at it in some ways. And so it's I'm really proud of it. It was really hard to write, and I really hope that it's helpful in people's journey in some way. I think it's for everybody. I know a bunch of educators have already pre-ordered it. That would be the biggest audience so far. But if you're a parent, if you're not a parent, if you're someone that loves school or struggled at school, I think there's something for any human being in it, really. Yeah, the title, Trauma Has a Whakapapa, is really sharing with people that your trauma didn't necessarily start with you. It comes from somewhere else. And that's my way of saying to people, have grace with yourself and show the empathy towards others. So, yeah, that book's out February 16th and available on my website, www.jasewilliams.
Awesome. Thank you. It's a really incredible book. It's not about head knowledge. It really speaks to the heart, and just a really transformative piece of writing. Yeah. Awesome. So if there was something, Jase, that you could say to your younger self, what would you like him to hear?
That you're okay. That it's going to be okay. That you're good enough. If I had have felt that then, life would have been so much easier, so much smoother. I wouldn't have ruptured, and that sounds like blame now, but I wouldn't have ruptured the connections that I had. I would have been a much better dad earlier on than I was. I think, yeah, knowing that I was good enough, it's one of my personal biggest triggers is feeling like I'm not good enough. And because of the work I do, I realise how many other people carry that, as in everybody carries that in some way. Everyone's felt that in some time of their life as a child, and it's shown up in different ways as an adult. And depending on how much inner work you've done on yourself, depends on how long that feeling hangs around. So for me now, when I'm kind of challenged by negative feedback, or when I feel like I'm not good enough, it still comes up. The triggers don't go anywhere. They're always going to be there in some form, but how long they hang around is dependent on the work you do. So those feelings for now don't hang around very long. They used to be debilitating, excruciating was kind of how it felt, and they'd hang around way too long, so they don't hang around as much now. So yeah, I wish younger me knew that. Those were talks we have, that kind of inner child stuff with my children now, especially with my son. We talk about that stuff, and I guess to me it was really, he's in his first real relationship now, and he came to me and we were having dinner one night and he said, hey Dad, like, in my relationship, we're going through this. Yeah, I'm sorry son, that's me, that's my shit, that's been transmitted. And oh really? Yeah. I said, he goes, and so I have that now. I said, yeah. I said, but if you were, say, to have kids, they might not, because you're going to do the work on it. Well, they may have, but you're still doing the work, so it's going to rupture. So it's going to repair the rupture that's been caused by me a generation ago, or 2 generations ago for your children. So we had that talk. So it's so cool we can talk about this hard stuff, the stuff we never talked about at home. We never talked about anything important. I think that was just a generation, an era, and we do. So to me, when I'm able to hold space and grace for my parents, that they did the best they could, I've done the best I can, but I also have a different awareness and a different knowledge than they had. And because I have that, I've got to do better. So I use the quote from Maya Angelou that once you know better, you do better. And I hold that to my heart because that's how I try and live my life. It's how I try and show up. I don't always. No one's perfect. We regress. We still will do shitty things we've done before, but the repair happens so much quicker. The way people felt around me is not the same as before. So grace is such an important concept that I don't think a lot of us give a lot of time and space to feel.
Thank you. That was beautiful. I love how the healing happens when we shift from blaming ourselves to actually receiving that grace.
Yeah. Even sitting here now, Andrea, if we had this talk 3 years ago, maybe even 2 years ago, my emotions would have overwhelmed me in different parts. And I mean, if I needed to cry here now, I'd cry. And I've done enough work where those feelings aren't overwhelming in that space. So it's lovely to be able to sit here and be present with you and be authentic, be real, and just share nervous systems. That's really cool.
Thank you. It must be beautiful to look back and go, capacity, right? Your healing capacity has grown, and sometimes it's good to look back and go, wow, I've come a long way.
The hardest thing I ever did in therapy was that. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. And I can't remember how we got to that point in the session, but Jacinda said to me, do you know what a potama is? I said, oh yeah, like steps. Yeah. She goes, you're at the top of it. Okay. And she goes, and you're about to walk down the other side. But before you walk down, I want you to turn back and look down at everything you've achieved and the changes. And I just sat there and cried, and I couldn't. What's the word? I couldn't. It was too hard. It was too hard to cope with. Like, in the work I do, there are people that will come up to me and say, oh, it's great, that was amazing, that was good, and all that kind of stuff. And I show gratitude because it's nice to hear that. But it's also really hard to hear that for me as well, because when you go most of your life never hearing that, having to try twice as hard to be seen, it's hard. So looking back at the top of that potama, that was really, really hard for me. But I am proud. She asked me, are you proud? And I am. And she said, what are you proud of? And I found it really hard to talk about what it was. I'm able to talk about those things easier now. But it's, you can know some stuff, and I know some stuff around relational neuroscience, but there's still so much more to learn. There's still so much work to do. No one is a finished product until the day you give your last breath. And even then, people that emanate from you, your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, they're still carrying 260 generations too. The work is still to be done. And I remember a conversation with my friend Sarah Brown, and we both see the same therapist. And I said to Sarah one day after therapy, because it was so amazing, massive breakthroughs, I said, hey, us going to therapy means our kids won't have to. And she goes, no, brother. She said, our kids will still have to go to therapy because the world's a pretty stuffed up place right now. They're going to have to navigate things that we can't even dream of yet. She said, but they're not going to have to deal with our shit at therapy. And I like that. I really like that.
Love that. Thank you so much, Jase, for this very vulnerable, open, courageous conversation. Thank you for showing up with presence and showing up as you. And, just like your younger self would say, you are enough and you are okay as you are.
And that's still hard to hear, but I thank you so much for that.
So thank you, Jase, for coming along as my guest, and thank you, everybody, for listening to another episode of Empowering the Village. That wraps up another episode of Empowering the Village. I hope today's conversation has provided you with valuable insights and the inspiration you need to make a difference in the lives of the children you care deeply about. You don't have to navigate this journey alone. We have a wealth of additional resources, courses, and tools designed to empower you further. Head over to our learning platform at nurturingrelationships.thinkific.com to access resources and learning to continue making a positive impact. Thank you so much for listening and being a vital part of this community. Until next time, let's keep empowering the village.